This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Daniel Deronda by George Eliot. Chapter 53. My desolation does begin to make a better life. Shakespeare, Antony and Cleopatra. Before Deronda was summoned to a second interview with his mother, a day had passed in which she had only sent him a message to say that she was not yet well enough to receive him again. But on the third morning he had a note saying, "I leave to-day. Come and see me at once." He was shown into the same room as before, but it was much darkened with blinds and curtains. The princess was not there, but she presently entered, dressed in a loose wrap of some soft silk, in color a dusky orange, her head again with black lace floating about it, her arms showing themselves bare from under her wide sleeves. Her face seemed even more impressive in the somber light, the eyes larger, the lines more vigorous. You might have imagined her a sorceress who would stretch forth her wonderful hand and arm to mix youth potions for others, but scorned to mix them for herself, having had enough of youth. She put her arms on her son's shoulders at once and kissed him on both cheeks, then seated herself among her cushions with an air of assured firmness and dignity unlike her fitfulness in their first interview, and told Deronda to sit down by her. He obeyed, saying, "You are quite relieved now, I trust?" "Yes, I am at ease again. Is there anything more that you would like to ask me?" she said, with the manner of a queen rather than of a mother. "Can I find the house in Genoa where you used to live with my grandfather?" said Deronda. "No," she answered, with a deprecating movement of her arm. "It is pulled down, not to be found. But about our family, and where my father lived at various times, you will find all that among the papers in the chest, better than I can tell you. My father, I told you, was a physician. My mother was a Mirah. I used to hear all those things without listening. You will find them all. I was born amongst them without my will. I banished them as soon as I could." Deronda tried to hide his pained feeling, and said, "Anything else that I should desire to know from you could only be what is some satisfaction to your own feeling to tell me." "I think I have told you everything that could be demanded of me," said the princess, looking coldly meditative. It seemed as if she had exhausted her emotion in their former interview. The fact was, she had said to herself, "I have done it all. I have confessed all. I will not go through it again. I will save myself from agitation." And she was acting out that scheme. But to Deronda's nature the moment was cruel. It made the filial yearning of his life a disappointed pilgrimage to a shrine where there were no longer the symbols of sacredness. It seemed that all the woman lacking in her was present in him, as he said, with some tremor in his voice, "Then are we to part, and I never be anything to you?" "It is better so," said the princess, in a softer, mellower voice. "There could be nothing but hard duty for you, even if it were possible for you to take the place of my son. You would not love me. Don't deny it," she said, abruptly putting up her hand. "I know what is the truth. You don't like what I did. You are angry with me. You think I robbed you of something. You are on your grandfather's side, and you will always have a condemnation of me in your heart." Deronda felt himself under a ban of silence. He rose from his seat by her, preferring to stand if he had to obey that imperious prohibition of any tenderness. But his mother now looked up at him with a new admiration in her glance, saying, "You are wrong to be angry with me. You are the better for what I did." After pausing a little, she added abruptly, "And now tell me what you shall do." "Do you mean now, immediately?" said Deronda, "or as to the course of my future life?" "I mean in the future. What difference will it make to you that I have told you about your birth?" "A very great difference," said Deronda, emphatically. "I can hardly think of anything that would make a greater difference." "What shall you do, then?" said the princess, with more sharpness. "Make yourself just like your grandfather? Be what he wished you? Turn yourself into a Jew like him?" That is impossible. The effect of my education can never be done away with. The Christian sympathies in which my mind was reared can never die out of me," said Deronda, with increasing tenacity of tone. "But I consider it my duty, it is the impulse of my feeling, to identify myself, as far as possible, with my hereditary people, and if I can see any work to be done for them that I can give my soul and hand to, I shall choose to do it." His mother had her eyes fixed on him with a wondering speculation, examining his face as if she thought that by close attention she could read a difficult language there. He bore her gaze very firmly, sustained by a resolute opposition, which was the expression of his fullest self. She bent toward him a little, and said with a decisive emphasis, "You are in love with a Jewess." Deronda colored and said, "My reasons would be independent of any such fact." "I know better. I have seen what men are," said the Princess, peremptorily. "Tell me the truth. She is a Jewess who will not accept any one but a Jew. There are a few such," she added, with a touch of scorn. Deronda had that objection to answer which we all have known in speaking to those who are too certain of their own fixed interpretations to be enlightened by anything we may say. But besides this, the point immediately in question was one on which he felt a repugnance either to deny or affirm. He remained silent, and she presently said, "You love her as your father loved me, and she draws you after her as I drew him." Those words touched Deronda's filial imagination, and some tenderness in his glance was taken by his mother as an assent. She went on with rising passion, "But I was leading him the other way, and now your grandfather is getting his revenge." "Mother," said Deronda, remonstrantly, "don't let us think of it in that way. I will admit that there may come some benefit from the education you chose for me. I prefer cherishing the belief with gratitude to dwelling with resentment on the injury. I think it would have been right that I should have been brought up with the consciousness that I was a Jew, but it must always have been a good to me to have as wide an instruction and sympathy as possible. And now you have restored me my inheritance. Events have brought a fuller restitution than you could have made. You have been saved from robbing my people of my service and me of my duty. Can you not bring your whole soul to consent to this?" Deronda paused in his pleading. His mother looked at him listeningly, as if the cadence of his voice were taking her ear, yet she shook her head slowly. He began again, even more urgently. "You have told me that you sought what you held the best for me. Open your heart to relenting and love toward my grandfather, who sought what he held the best for you." "Not for me, no," she said, shaking her head with more absolute denial and folding her arms tightly. "I tell you he never thought of his daughter except as an instrument. Because I had wants outside his purpose, I was to be put in a frame and tortured. If that is the right law for the world, I will not say that I love it. If my acts were wrong, if it is God who is exacting from me that I should deliver up what I withheld, who was punishing me because I deceived my father and did not warn him that I should contradict his trust—well, I have told you everything. I have done what I could. And your soul consents. That is enough. I have after all been the instrument my father wanted. I desire a grandson who shall have a true Jewish heart. Every Jew should rear his family as if he hoped that a deliverer might spring from it." In uttering these last sentences the princess narrowed her eyes, waved her head up and down, and spoke slowly with a new kind of chest voice, as if she were quoting unwillingly. "Were those my grandfather's words?" said Deronda. "Yes, yes, and you will find them written. I wanted to thwart him," said the princess, with a sudden outburst of the passion she had shown in the former interview. Then she added more slowly, "You would have me love what I have hated from the time I was so high." Here she held her left hand a yard from the floor. "That can never be. But what does it matter? His yoke has been on me, whether I loved it or not. You are the grandson he wanted. You speak as men do, as if you felt yourself wise. What does it all mean?" Her tone was abrupt and scornful. Deronda, in his pained feeling, and under the solemn urgency of the moment, had to keep a clutching remembrance of their relationship, lest his words should become cruel. He began in a deep entreating tone, "Mother, don't say that I feel myself wise. We are set in the midst of difficulties. I see no other way to get any clearness than by being truthful, not by keeping back facts which should carry obligation with them, which should make the only guidance toward duty. No wonder if such facts come to reveal themselves in spite of concealments. The effects prepared by generations are likely to triumph over a contrivance which would bend them all to the satisfaction of self. Your will was strong, but my grandfather's trust, which you accepted and did not fulfill, what you call his yoke, is the expression of something stronger, with deeper, farther spreading roots, knit into the foundations of sacredness for all men. You renounced me, you still banish me, as a son." There was an involuntary movement of indignation in Deronda's voice. "But that stronger something has determined that I shall be all the more the grandson whom also you willed to annihilate." His mother was watching him fixedly, and again her face gathered admiration. After a moment's silence she said, in a low persuasive tone, "Sit down again." And he obeyed, placing himself beside her. She laid her hand on his shoulder and went on, "You rebuke me. Well, I am the loser, and you are angry because I banish you. What could you do for me but weary your own patience? Your mother is a shattered woman. My sense of life is little more than a sense of what was, except when the pain is present. You reproach me that I parted with you. I had joy enough without you then. Now you are come back to me, and I cannot make you a joy. Have you the cursing spirit of the Jew in you? Are you not able to forgive me? Shall you be glad to think that I am punished because I was not a Jewish mother to you?" "How can you ask me that?" said Deronda, remonstrantly. "Have I not besought you that I might now at least be a son to you? My grief is that you have declared me helpless to comfort you. I would give up much that is dear for the sake of soothing your anguish." "You shall give up nothing," said his mother, with the hurry of agitation. "You shall be happy. You shall let me think of you as happy. I shall have done you no harm. You have no reason to curse me. You shall feel for me as they feel for the dead whom they say prayers for. You shall long that I may be freed from all suffering, from all punishment. And I shall see you instead of always seeing your grandfather. Will any harm come to me because I broke his trust in the daylight after he was gone into darkness? I cannot tell. If you think Kaddish will help me, say it, say it! You will come between me and the dead. When I am in your mind, you will look as you do now, always as if you were a tender son, always as if I had been a tender mother." She seemed resolved that her agitation should not conquer her, but he felt her hand trembling on his shoulder. Deep, deep compassion hemmed in all words. With a face of beseeching he put his arm around her and pressed her head tenderly under his. They sat so for some moments. Then she lifted her head again and rose from her seat with a great sigh, as if in that breath she were dismissing a weight of thoughts. Deronda, standing in front of her, felt that the parting was near, but one of her swift alternations had come upon his mother. "Is she beautiful?" she said abruptly. "Who?" said Deronda, changing color. "The woman you love." It was not a moment for deliberate explanation. He was obliged to say, "Yes." "Not ambitious?" "No, I think not." "Not one who must have a path of her own?" "I think her nature is not given to make great claims." "She is not like that," said the Princess, taking from her wallet a miniature with jewels around it, and holding it before her son. It was her own in all the fire of youth, and as Deronda looked at it with admiring sadness, she said, "Had I not a rightful claim to be something more than a mere daughter and mother? The voice and the genius matched the face. Whatever else was wrong, acknowledge that I had a right to be an artist, though my father's will was against it. My nature gave me a charter." "I do acknowledge that," said Deronda, looking from the miniature to her face, which even in its worn pallor had an expression of living force beyond anything that the pencil could show. "Will you take the portrait?" said the Princess more gently. "If she is a kind woman, teach her to think of me kindly." "I shall be grateful for the portrait," said Deronda. "But I ought to say, I have no assurance that she whom I love will have any love for me. I have kept silence." "Who and what is she?" said the mother. The question seemed a command. "She was brought up as a singer for the stage," said Deronda, with inward reluctance. "Her father took her away early from her mother, and her life has been unhappy. She is very young—only 20. Her father wished to bring her up in disregard, even in dislike of her Jewish origin, but she has clung with all her affection to the memory of her mother and the fellowship of her people." "Ah, like you. She is attached to the Judaism she knows nothing of," said the Princess peremptorily. "That is poetry, fit to last through an opera night. Is she fond of her artist's life? Is her singing worth anything?" "Her singing is exquisite, but her voice is not suited to the stage. I think that the artist's life has been made repugnant to her." "Why, she is made for you, then. Sir Hugo said you were bitterly against being a singer, and I can see that you would never have let yourself be merged in a wife, as your father was." "I repeat," said Deronda, emphatically—"I repeat that I have no assurance of her love for me, of the possibility that we can ever be united. Other things, painful issues may lie before me. I have always felt that I should prepare myself to renounce, not cherish that prospect. But I suppose I might feel so of happiness in general. Whether it may come or not, one should try and prepare one's self to do without it." "Do you feel in that way?" said his mother, laying her hands on his shoulders and perusing his face, while she spoke in a low meditative tone, pausing between her sentences. "Poor boy! I wonder how it would have been if I had kept you with me; whether you would have turned your heart to the old things against mine, and we should have quarreled. Your grandfather would have been in you, and you would have hampered my life with your young growth from the old root." "I think my affection might have lasted through all our quarreling," said Deronda, saddened more and more. "And that would not have hampered. Surely it would have enriched your life." "Not then. I did not want it then. I might have been glad of it now," said the mother, with a bitter melancholy, "if I could have been glad of anything." "But you love your other children, and they love you?" said Deronda, anxiously. "Oh, yes," she answered, as to a question about a matter of course, while she folded her arms again. "But," she added in a deeper tone, "I am not a loving woman. That is the truth. It is a talent to love. I lack it. Others have loved me, and I have acted their love. I know very well what love makes of men and women. It is subjection. It takes another for a larger self, enclosing this one." She pointed to her own bosom. "I was never willingly subject to any man. Men have been subject to me." "Perhaps the man who was subject was the happier of the two," said Deronda, not with a smile, but with a grave, sad sense of his mother's privation. "Perhaps. But I was happy. For a few years I was happy. If I had not been afraid of defeat and failure, I might have gone on. I miscalculated. What then? It is all over. Another life. Men talk of another life as if it only began on the other side of the grave. I have long entered on another life." With the last words she raised her arms till they were bare to the elbow. Her brow was contracted in one deep fold, her eyes were closed, her voice was smothered. In her dusky flame‐colored garment she looked like a dreamed visitant from some region of departed mortals. Deronda's feeling was wrought to a pitch of acuteness in which he was no longer quite master of himself. He gave an audible sob. His mother opened her eyes, and letting her hands again rest on his shoulders, said, "Good-bye, my son, good-bye. We shall hear no more of each other. Kiss me." He clasped his arms around her neck, and they kissed each other. Deronda did not know how he got out of the room. He felt an older man. All his boyish yearnings and anxieties about his mother had vanished. He had gone through a tragic experience which must forever solemnize his life, and deepen the significance of the acts by which he bound himself to others. End of chapter 53. This recording is in the public domain. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Daniel Deronda by George Eliot. Chapter 54. The unwilling brain feigns often what it would not, and we trust imagination with such fantasies as the tongue dares not fashion into words. Which have no words, their horror makes them dim to the mind's eye. Shelley. Madonna Pia, whose husband, feeling himself injured by her, took her to his castle amid the swampy flats of the Maremma and got rid of her there, makes a pathetic figure in Dante's Purgatory, among the sinners who repented at the last and desired to be remembered compassionately by their fellow countrymen. We know little about the grounds of mutual discontent between the Sienese couple, but we may infer with some confidence that the husband had never been a very delightful companion, and that on the flats of the Maremma his disagreeable manners had a background which threw them out remarkably. Whence in his desire to punish his wife to the utmost, the nature of things was so far against him that in relieving himself of her he could not avoid making the relief mutual. And thus, without any hardness to the poor Tuscan lady who had her deliverance long ago, one may feel warranted in thinking of her with a less sympathetic interest than of the better-known Gwendolen, who instead of being delivered from her errors on earth and cleansed from their effect in purgatory, is at the very height of her entanglement in those fatal meshes which are woven within more closely than without, and often make the inward torture disproportionate to what is discernible as outward cause. In taking his wife with him on a yachting expedition, Grandcourt had no intention to get rid of her. On the contrary, he wanted to feel more securely that she was his to do as he liked with, and to make her feel it also. Moreover, he was himself very fond of yachting. Its dreamy do-nothing absolutism, unmolested by social demands, suited his disposition, and he did not in the least regard it as an equivalent for the dreariness of the Maremma. He had his reasons for carrying Gwendolen out of reach, but they were not reasons that can seem black in the mere statement. He suspected a growing spirit of opposition in her, and his feeling about the sentimental inclination she betrayed for Deronda was what in another man he would have called jealousy. In himself it seemed merely a resolution to put an end to such foolery as might have been going on in that prearranged visit of Deronda's, which he had divined and interrupted. And Grandcourt might have pleaded that he was perfectly justified in taking care that his wife should fulfill the obligations she had accepted. Her marriage was a contract where all the ostensible advantages were on her side, and it was only of those advantages that her husband should use his power to hinder her from any injurious self-committal or unsuitable behavior. He knew quite well that she had not married him, had not overcome her repugnance to certain facts, out of love to him personally. He had won her by the rank and luxuries he had to give her, and these she had got. He had fulfilled his side of the contract. And Gwendolen, we know, was thoroughly aware of the situation. She could not excuse herself by saying that there had been a tacit part of the contract on her side, namely, that she meant to rule and have her own way. With all her early indulgence in the disposition to dominate, she was not one of the narrow-brained women who through life regard all their own selfish demands as rights, and every claim upon themselves as an injury. She had a root of conscience in her, and the process of purgatory had begun for her on the green earth. She knew that she had been wrong. But now enter into the soul of this young creature as she found herself, with the blue Mediterranean dividing her from the world, on the tiny plank island of a yacht, the domain of the husband to whom she felt that she had sold herself, and had been paid the strict price, nay, paid more than she had dared to ask in the handsome maintenance of her mother, the husband to whom she had sold her truthfulness and sense of justice, so that he held them throttled into silence, collared and dragged behind him to witness what he would, without remonstrance. What had she to complain of? The yacht was of the prettiest, the cabin fitted up to perfection, smelling of cedar, soft cushioned, hung with silk, expanded with mirrors. The crew such as suited an elegant toy, one of them having even ringlets as well as a bronze complexion and fine teeth. And Mr. Lush was not there, for he had taken his way back to England as soon as he had seen all and everything on board. Moreover, Gwendolen herself liked the sea. It did not make her ill, and to observe the rigging of the vessel and forecast the necessary adjustments was a sort of amusement that might have gratified her activity and enjoyment of imaginary rule. The weather was fine, and they were coasting southward, where even the rain-furrowed, heat-cracked clay becomes gem-like with purple shadows, and where one may float between blue and blue in an open-eyed dream that the world has done with sorrow. But what can still that hunger of the heart which sickens the eye for beauty, and makes sweet-scented ease an oppression? What sort of Moslem paradise would quiet the terrible fury of moral repulsion and cowed resistance, which, like an eating pain intensifying into torture, concentrates the mind in that poisonous misery? While Gwendolen, throned on her cushions at evening, and beholding the glory of sea and sky softening as if with boundless love around her, was hoping that Grandcourt in his march up and down was not going to pause near her, not going to look at her or speak to her, some woman under a smoky sky, obliged to consider the price of eggs in arranging her dinner, was listening for the music of a footstep that would remove all risk from her foretaste of joy. Some couple, bending cheek by cheek over a bit of work done by the one and delighted in by the other, were reckoning the earnings that would make them rich enough for a holiday among the firs and heather. Had Grandcourt the least conception of what was going on in the breast of his wife? He conceived that she did not love him, but was that necessary? She was under his power, and he was not accustomed to soothe himself, as some cheerfully disposed persons are, with the conviction that he was very generally and justly beloved. But what lay quite away from his conception was that she could have any special repulsion for him personally. How could she? He himself knew what personal repulsion was, nobody better. His mind was much furnished with a sense of what brutes his fellow creatures were, both masculine and feminine, what odious familiarities they had, what smirks, what modes of flourishing their handkerchiefs, what costume, what lavender water, what bulging eyes, and what foolish notions of making themselves agreeable by remarks which were not wanted. In this critical view of mankind there was an affinity between him and Gwendolen before their marriage, and we know that she had been attractingly wrought upon by the refined negations he presented to her. Hence he understood her repulsion for Lush. But how was he to understand or conceive her present repulsion for Henleigh Grandcourt? Some men might bring themselves to believe, and to not merely maintain, the non-existence of an external world. A few others believed themselves objects of repulsion to a woman without being told so in plain language. But Grandcourt did not belong to this eccentric body of thinkers. He had all his life had reason to take a flattering view of his own attractiveness, and to place himself in fine antithesis to the men who he saw at once must be revolting to a woman of taste. He had no idea of moral repulsion, and could not have believed, if he had been told it, that there may be a resentment and disgust which will gradually make beauty more detestable than ugliness. through exasperation at that outward virtue in which hateful things can flaunt themselves or find a supercilious advantage. How, then, could Grandcourt divine what was going on in Gwendolen's breast? For their behavior to each other scandalized no observer, not even the foreign maid warranted against seasickness, nor Grandcourt's own experienced valet, still less the picturesque crew, who regarded them as a model couple in high life. Their companionship consisted chiefly in a well-bred silence. Grandcourt had no humorous observations at which Gwendolen could refuse to smile, no chit-chat to make small occasions of dispute. He was perfectly polite in arranging an additional garment over her when needful, and in handing her any object that he perceived her to need, and she could not fall into the vulgarity of accepting or rejecting such politeness rudely. Grandcourt put up his telescope and said, "There's a plantation of sugar canes at the foot of that rock. Should you like to look?" Gwendolen said, "Yes, please," remembering that she must try and interest herself in sugar canes as something outside her personal affairs. Then Grandcourt would walk up and down and smoke for a long while, pausing occasionally to point out a sail on the horizon, and at last would seat himself and look at Gwendolen with his narrow, immovable gaze, as if she were part of the complete yacht; while she, conscious of being looked at, was exerting her ingenuity not to meet his eyes. At dinner he would remark that the fruit was getting stale, and that they must put in somewhere for more; or observing that she did not drink the wine, he asked her if she would like any other kind better. A lady was obliged to respond to these things suitably, and even if she had not shrunk from quarreling on other grounds, quarreling with Grandcourt was impossible. She might as well have made angry remarks to a dangerous serpent ornamentally coiled in her cabin without invitation. And what sort of dispute would a woman of any pride and dignity begin on a yacht? Grandcourt had intense satisfaction in leading his wife captive under this fashion. It gave their life on a small scale a royal representation and publicity in which everything familiar was got rid of, and everybody must do what was expected of them, whatever might be their private protest. The protest, kept strictly private, adding to the piquancy of despotism. To Gwendolen, who even in the freedom of her maiden time had had very faint glimpses of any heroism or sublimity, the medium that now thrust itself everywhere before her view was this husband and her relation to him. The beings closest to us, whether in love or hate, are often virtually our interpreters of the world, and some feather-headed gentleman or lady whom in passing we regret to take as legal tender for a human being, may be acting as a melancholy theory of life in the minds of those who live with them, like a piece of yellow and wavy glass that distorts form and makes color an affliction. Their trivial sentences, their petty standards, their low suspicions, their loveless ennui may be making somebody else's life no better than a promenade through a pantheon of ugly idols. Gwendolen had that kind of window before her, affecting the distant equally with the near. Some unhappy wives are soothed by the possibility that they may become mothers, but Gwendolen felt that to desire a child for herself would have been a consenting to the completion of the injury she had been guilty of. She was reduced to dread lest she should become a mother. It was not the image of a new, sweetly budding life that came as a vision of deliverance from the monotony of distaste. It was an image of another sort. In the irritable, fluctuating stages of despair, gleams of hope came in the form of some possible accident. To dwell on the benignity of accident was a refuge from worse temptation. The embitterment of hatred is often as unaccountable to onlookers as the growth of devoted love, and it not only seems but is really out of direct relation with any outward causes to be alleged. Passion is of the nature of seed, and finds nourishment within, tending to a predominance which determines all currents toward itself, and makes the whole life its tributary. And the intensest form of hatred is that rooted in fear, which compels to silence and drives vehemence into a constructive vindictiveness, an imaginary annihilation of the detested object, something like the hidden rites of vengeance with which the persecuted have made a dark vent for their rage and soothed their suffering into numbness. Such hidden rites went on in the secrecy of Gwendolen's mind, but not with soothing effect, rather with the effect of a struggling terror. Side by side with the dread of her husband had grown the self-dread, which urged her to flee from the pursuing images wrought by her pent-up impulse. The vision of her past wrong-doing and what it had brought on her came with a pale ghastly illumination over every imagined deed that was a rash effort at freedom, such as she had made in her marriage. Moreover, she had learned to see all her acts through the impression they would make on Deronda. Whatever relief might come to her, she could not sever it from the judgment of her that would be created in his mind. Not one word of flattery, of indulgence, of dependence on her favor, could be fastened on by her in all their intercourse to weaken his restraining power over her. In this way Deronda's effort over himself was repaid. And amid the dreary uncertainties of her spoiled life, the possible remedies that lay in his mind, nay, the remedy that lay in her feeling for him, made her only hope. He seemed to her a terrible-browed angel, from whom she could not think of concealing any deed so as to win an ignorant regard from him. It belonged to the nature of their relation that she should be truthful, for his power over her had begun in the raising of a self-discontent which could be satisfied only by genuine change. But in no concealment had she now any confidence. Her vision of what she had to dread took more decidedly than ever the form of some fiercely impulsive deed, committed as in a dream that she would instantaneously wake from, to find the effects real though the images had been false, to find death under her hands, but instead of darkness, daylight; instead of satisfied hatred, the dismay of guilt; instead of freedom, the palsy of a new terror, a white dead face from which she was forever trying to flee and forever held back. She remembered Deronda's words. They were continually recurring in her thought. Turn your fear into a safeguard. Keep your dread fixed on the idea of increasing your remorse. Take your fear as a safeguard. It is like quickness of hearing. It may make consequences passionately present to you. And so it was. In Gwendolen's consciousness, temptation and dread met and stared like two pale phantoms, each seeing itself in the other, each obstructed by its own image. And all the while her fuller self beheld the apparitions and sobbed for deliverance from them. Inarticulate prayers, no more definite than a cry, often swept out from her into the vast silence, unbroken except by her husband's breathing, or the plash of the wave, or the creaking of the masts. But if ever she thought of definite help, it took the form of Deronda's presence and words, of the sympathy he might have for her, of the direction he might give her. It was sometimes after a white-lipped, fierce-eyed temptation with murdering fingers had made its demon visit, that these best moments of inward crying and clinging for rescue would come to her, and she would lie with wide-open eyes in which the rising tears seemed a blessing, and the thought, "I will not mind if I can keep from getting wicked," seemed an answer to the indefinite prayer. So the days passed, taking with them light breezes beyond and about the Balearic Isles, and then to Sardinia, and then with gentle change persuading them northward again toward Corsica. But this floating, gentle-wafted existence, with its apparently peaceful influences, was becoming as bad as a nightmare to Gwendolen. "How long are we to be yachting?" she ventured to ask one day after they had been touching at Ajaccio, and the mere fact of change and going ashore had given her a relief from some of the thoughts which seemed now to cling about the very rigging of the vessel, mix with the air in the red silk cabin below, and make the smell of the sea odious. "What else should we do?" said Grandcourt. "I'm not tired of it. I don't see why we shouldn't stay out any length of time. There's less to bore one in this way. And where would you go to? I'm sick of foreign places, and we shall have enough of Ryelands. Would you rather be at Ryelands?" "Oh, no," said Gwendolen, indifferently, finding all places alike undescribable as soon as she imagined herself and her husband in them. "I only wondered how long you would like this." "I like yachting longer than anything else," said Grandcourt, "and I had none last year. I suppose you are beginning to tire of it. Women are so confoundedly whimsical. They expect everything to give way to them." "Oh dear, no," said Gwendolen, letting out her scorn in a flute-like tone. "I never expect you to give way." "Why should I?" said Grandcourt, with his inward voice, looking at her, and then choosing an orange, for they were at table. She made up her mind to a length of yachting that she could not see beyond, but the next day, after a squall which had made her rather ill for the first time, he came down to her and said, "There's been the devil's own work in the night. The skipper says we shall have to stay at Genoa for a week while things are set right." "Do you mind that?" said Gwendolen, who lay looking very white amidst her white drapery. "I should think so. Who wants to be broiling at Genoa?" "It will be a change," said Gwendolen, made a little incautious by her languor. "I don't want any change. Besides, the place is intolerable, and one can't move along the roads. I shall go out in a boat as I used to do, and manage it myself. One can get a few hours every day in that way, instead of striving in a damnable hotel." Here was a prospect which held hope in it. Gwendolen thought of hours when she would be alone, since Grandcourt would not want to take her in the said boat, and in her exultation at this unlooked-for relief, she had wild contradictory fantasies of what she might do with her freedom. That running away which she had already innumerable times seen to be a worse evil than any actual endurance, now finding new arguments as an escape from her worse self. Also visionary relief on a par with the fancy of a prisoner that the night wind may blow down the wall of his prison and save him from desperate devices, insinuated itself as a better alternative, lawful to wish for. The fresh current of expectation revived her energies, and enabled her to take all things with an air of cheerfulness and alacrity that made a change marked enough to be noticed by her husband. She watched through the evening lights to the shrinking of the moon with less of awed loneliness than was habitual to her, nay, with a vague impression that in this mighty frame of things there might be some preparation of rescue for her. Why not, since the weather had just been on her side? This possibility of hoping, after her long fluctuation amid fears, was like a first return of hunger to the long languishing patient. She was waked the next morning by the casting of the anchor in the port of Genoa, waked from a strangely mixed dream in which she felt herself escaping over the Mont Cenis, and wondering to find it warmer even in the moonlight on the snow, till suddenly she met Deronda, who told her to go back. In an hour or so from that dream she actually met Deronda, but it was on the palatial staircase of the Italia, where she was feeling warm in her light woolen dress and straw hat, and her husband was by her side. There was a start of surprise in Deronda before he could raise his hat and pass on. The moment did not seem to favor any closer greeting, and the circumstances under which they had last parted made him doubtful whether Grandcourt would be civilly inclined to him. The doubt might certainly have been changed into a disagreeable certainty, for Grandcourt, on this unaccountable appearance of Deronda at Genoa of all places, immediately tried to conceive how there could have been an arrangement between him and Gwendolen. It is true that before they were well in their rooms he had seen how difficult it was to shape such an arrangement with any probability, being too cool-headed to find it at once easily credible that Gwendolen had not only while in London hastened to inform Deronda of the yachting project, but had posted a letter to him from Marseilles or Barcelona, advising him to travel to Genoa in time for the chance of meeting her there, or of receiving a letter from her telling of some other destination, all which must have implied a miraculous foreknowledge in her, and in Deronda a bird-like facility in flying about and perching idly. Still he was there, and though Grandcourt would not make a fool of himself by fabrications that others might call preposterous, he was not, for all that, disposed to admit fully that Deronda's presence was, so far as Gwendolen was concerned, a mere accident. It was a disgusting fact, that was enough, and no doubt she was well pleased. A man out of temper does not wait for proofs before feeling toward all things animate and inanimate as if they were in a conspiracy against him, but at once threshes his horse or kicks his dog in consequence. Grandcourt felt toward Gwendolen and Deronda as if he knew them to be in a conspiracy against him, and here was an event in league with them. What he took for clearly certain, and so far he divined the truth, was that Gwendolen was now counting on an interview with Deronda whenever her husband's back was turned. As he sat taking his coffee at a convenient angle for observing her, he discerned something which he felt sure was the effect of a secret delight, some fresh ease in moving and speaking, some peculiar meaning in her eyes, whatever she looked on. Certainly her troubles had not marred her beauty. Mrs. Grandcourt was handsomer than Gwendolen Harleth. Her grace and expression were informed by a greater variety of inward experience, giving new play to her features, new attitudes in movement and repose. Her whole person and air had the nameless something which often makes a woman more interesting after marriage than before, less confident that all things are according to her opinion, and yet with less of deer-like shyness, more fully a human being. This morning the benefits of the voyage seemed to be suddenly revealing themselves in a new elasticity of mien. As she rose from the table and put her two heavily jeweled hands on each side of her neck, according to her wont, she had no art to conceal that sort of joyous expectation which makes the present more bearable than usual, just as when a man means to go out he finds it easier to be amiable to the family for a quarter of an hour beforehand. It is not impossible that a terrier whose pleasure was concerned would perceive those amiable signs and know their meaning, know why his master stood in a peculiar way, talked with alacrity, and even had a peculiar gleam in his eye, so that on the least movement toward the door the terrier would scuttle to be in time. And in dog fashion Grandcourt discerned the signs of Gwendolen's expectation, interpreting them with the narrow correctness which leaves a world of unknown feeling behind. Just ring, please, and tell Gibbs to order some dinner for us at 3, said Grandcourt, as he too rose, took out a cigar, and then stretched his hand toward the hat that lay near. "I'm going to send Angus to find a little sailing boat for us to go out in, one that I can manage, with you at the tiller. It's uncommonly pleasant these fine evenings, the least boring of anything we can do." Gwendolen turned cold. There was not only the cruel disappointment, there was the immediate conviction that her husband had determined to take her because he would not leave her out of his sight, and probably this dual solitude in a boat was the more attractive to him because it would be wearisome to her. They were not on the plank island. She felt it the more possible to begin a contest, but the gleaming content had died out of her. There was a change in her like that of a glacier after sunset. "I would rather not go in the boat," she said. "Take some one else with you." "Very well. If you don't go, I shall not go," said Grandcourt. "We shall stay suffocating here, that's all." "I can't bear to go in a boat," said Gwendolen angrily. "That is a sudden change," said Grandcourt with a slight sneer. "But since you decline, we shall stay indoors." He laid down his hat again, lit his cigar, and walked up and down the room, pausing now and then to look out of the windows. Gwendolen's temper told her to persist. She knew very well now that Grandcourt would not go without her, but if he must tyrannize over her, he should not do it precisely in the way he would choose. She would oblige him to stay in the hotel. Without speaking again, she passed into the adjoining bedroom and threw herself into a chair with her anger, seeing no purpose or issue, only feeling that the wave of evil had rushed back upon her and dragged her away from her momentary breathing-place. Presently Grandcourt came in with his hat on, but threw it off and sat down sideways on a chair nearly in front of her, saying, in his superficial drawl, "Have you come round yet? Or do you find it agreeable to be out of temper? You make things uncommonly pleasant for me." "Why do you want to make them unpleasant for me?" said Gwendolen, getting helpless again, and feeling the hot tears rise. "Now, will you be good enough to say what it is you have to complain of?" said Grandcourt, looking into her eyes and using his most inward voice. "Is it that I stay indoors when you stay?" She could give no answer. The sort of truth that made any excuse for her anger could not be uttered. In the conflict of despair and humiliation she began to sob, and the tears rolled down her cheeks, a form of agitation which she had never shown before in her husband's presence. "I hope this is useful," said Grandcourt, after a moment or two. "All I can say is, it's most confoundedly unpleasant. What the devil women can see in this kind of thing, I don't know. You see something to be got by it, of course. All I can see is, that we shall be shut up here when we might have been having a pleasant sail." "Let us go, then," said Gwendolen, impetuously. "Perhaps we shall be drowned." She began to sob again. This extraordinary behavior, which had evidently some relation to Deronda, gave more definiteness to Grandcourt's conclusions. He drew his chair quite close in front of her and said, in a low tone, "Just be quiet and listen, will you?" There seemed to be a magical effect in this close vicinity. Gwendolen shrank and ceased to sob. She kept her eyelids down and clasped her hands tightly. "Let us understand each other," said Grandcourt, in the same tone. "I know very well what this nonsense means. But if you suppose I am going to let you make a fool of me, just dismiss that notion from your mind. What are you looking forward to if you can't behave properly as my wife? There's disgrace for you, if you like to have it, but I don't know anything else. And as to Deronda, it's quite clear that he hangs back from you." "It's all false," said Gwendolen, bitterly. "You don't in the least imagine what is in my mind. I have seen enough of the disgrace that comes in that way, and you had better leave me at liberty to speak with any one I like. It will be better for you." "You will allow me to judge of that," said Grandcourt, rising and moving to a little distance toward the window, but standing there playing with his whiskers as if he were awaiting something. Gwendolen's words had so clear and tremendous a meaning for herself that she thought they must have expressed it to Grandcourt, and had no sooner uttered them than she dreaded their effect. But his soul was garrisoned against presentiments and fears. He had the courage and confidence that belong to domination, and he was at that moment feeling perfectly satisfied that he held his wife with bit and bridle. By the time they had been married a year she would cease to be restive. He continued standing with his air of indifference, till she felt her habitual stifling consciousness of having an immovable obstruction in her life, like the nightmare of beholding a single form that serves to arrest all passage, though the wide country lies open. "What decision have you come to?" he said, presently looking at her. "What orders shall I give?" "Oh, let us go!" said Gwendolen. The walls had begun to be an imprisonment, and while there was breath in this man he would have the mastery over her. His words had the power of thumbscrews and the cold touch of the rock. To resist was to act like a stupid animal unable to measure results. So the boat was ordered. She even went down to the quay again with him to see it before midday. Grandcourt had recovered perfect quietude of temper, and had a scornful satisfaction in the attention given by the nautical groups to the milord, owner of the handsome yacht which had just put in for repairs, and who, being an Englishman, was naturally so at home on the sea that he could manage a sail with the same ease that he could manage a horse. The sort of exultation he had discerned in Gwendolen this morning, she now thought that she discerned in him, and it was true that he had set his mind on this boating, and carried out his purpose as something that people might not expect him to do, with the gratified impulse of a strong will which had nothing better to exert itself upon. He had remarkable physical courage, and was proud of it, or rather he had a great contempt for the coarser, bulkier men who generally had less. Moreover, he was ruling that Gwendolen should go with him. And when they came down again at 5 o'clock, equipped for their boating, the scene was as good as a theatrical representation for all beholders. This handsome, fair-skinned English couple, manifesting the usual eccentricity of their nation, both of them proud, pale, and calm, without a smile on their faces, moving like creatures who were fulfilling a supernatural destiny. It was a thing to go out and see, a thing to paint. The husband's chest, back, and arms showed very well in his close-fitting dress, and the wife was declared to be a statue. Some suggestions were proffered concerning a possible change in the breeze, and the necessary care in putting about, but Grandcourt's manner made the speakers understand that they were too officious, and that he knew better than they. Gwendolen, keeping her impassible air as they moved away from the strand, felt her imagination obstinately at work. She was not afraid of any outward dangers. She was afraid of her own wishes which were taking shapes possible and impossible, like a cloud of demon faces. She was afraid of her own hatred, which under the cold iron touch that had compelled her to-day had gathered a fierce intensity. As she sat guiding the tiller under her husband's eyes, doing just what he told her, the strife within her seemed like her own effort to escape from herself. She clung to the thought of Deronda. She persuaded herself that he would not go away while she was there. He knew that she needed help. The sense that he was there would save her from acting out the evil within. And yet, quick, quick, came images, plans of evil that would come again and seize her in the night, like furies preparing the deed that they would straightway avenge. They were taken out of the port and carried eastward by a gentle breeze. Some clouds tempered the sunlight, and the hour was always deepening toward the supreme beauty of the evening. Sails larger and smaller changed their aspect like sensitive things, and made a cheerful companionship, alternately near and far. The grand city shone more vaguely, the mountains looked out above it, and there was stillness as in an island sanctuary. Yet suddenly Gwendolen let her hands fall, and said in a scarcely audible tone, "God help me!" "What is the matter?" said Grandcourt, not distinguishing the words. "Oh, nothing," said Gwendolen, rousing herself from her momentary forgetfulness and resuming the ropes. "Don't you find this pleasant?" said Grandcourt. "Very." "You admit now we couldn't have done anything better." "No, I see nothing better. I think we shall go on always, like the Flying Dutchman," said Gwendolen wildly. Grandcourt gave her one of his narrow examining glances, and then said, "If you like, we can go to Spezia in the morning and let them take us up there." "No, I shall like nothing better than this." "Very well. We'll do the same to-morrow. But we must be turning in soon. I shall put about." End of chapter 54. This recording is in the public domain. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Daniel Deronda by George Eliot. Chapter 55. Ritorna a tua scienza, che vuoi quanto la cosa è più perfetta, più santa il bene e così la dolienza. Dante. When Deronda met Gwendolen and Grandcourt on the staircase, his mind was seriously preoccupied. He had just been summoned to the second interview with his mother. In 2 hours after his parting from her, he knew that the Princess Halm Eberstein had left the hotel, and so far as the purpose of his journey to Genoa was concerned, he might himself have set off on his way to Mainz to deliver the letter from Joseph Kalonymos and get possession of the family chest. But mixed mental conditions, which did not resolve themselves into definite reasons, hindered him from departure. Long after the farewell he was kept passive by a weight of retrospective feeling. He lived again with a new keenness of emotive memory through the exciting scenes which seemed past only in the sense of preparation for their actual presence in his soul. He allowed himself in his solitude to sob with perhaps more than a woman's acuteness of compassion over that woman's life so near to his, and yet so remote. He beheld the world changed for him by the certitude of ties that altered the poise of hopes and fears, and gave him a new sense of fellowship, as if under cover of the night he had joined the wrong band of wanderers, and found with the rise of morning that the tents of his kindred were grouped far off. He had a quivering imaginative sense of close relation to the grandfather, who had been animated by strong impulses and beloved thoughts, which were now perhaps being roused from their slumber within himself. And through all this passionate meditation, Mordecai and Mirah were always present, as beings who clasped hands with him in sympathetic silence. Of such quick, responsive fibre was Deronda made, under that mantle of self-controlled reserve into which early experience had thrown so much of his young strength. When the persistent ringing of a bell as a signal reminded him of the hour, he thought of looking in to Bradshaw and making the brief necessary preparations for starting by the next train, thought of it, but made no movement in consequence. Wishes went to Mainz and what he was to get possession of there, to London and the beings there who made the strongest attachments of his life. But there were other wishes that clung in these moments to Genoa, and kept him where he was by that force which urges us to linger over an interview that carries a presentiment of final farewell or of overshadowing sorrow. Deronda did not formally say, "I will stay over tonight because it is Friday, and I should like to go to the evening service at the synagogue where they must all have gone, and besides I may see the Grandcourts again." But simply, instead of packing and ringing for his bell, he sat doing nothing at all, while his mind went to the synagogue and saw faces there probably little different from those of his grandfather's time, and heard the Spanish Hebrew liturgy, which had lasted through the seasons of wandering generations like a plant with wandering seed, that gives the far-off lands a kinship to the exile's home, while also his mind went toward Gwendolen, with anxious remembrance of what had been, and with a half-admitted impression that it would be hardness in him willingly to go away at once without making some effort, in spite of Grandcourt's probable dislike, to manifest the continuance of his sympathy with her since their abrupt parting. In this state of mind he deferred departure, ate his dinner without sense of flavor, rose from it quickly to find the synagogue, and in passing the porter asked if Mr. and Mrs. Grandcourt were still in the hotel, and what was the number of their apartment. The porter gave him the number, but added that they were gone out boating. That information had somehow power enough over Deronda to divide his thoughts with the memories awakened among the sparse Dalathim and keen dark faces of worshippers whose way of taking awful prayers and invocations with the easy familiarity which might be called Hebrew dyed Italian, made him reflect that his grandfather, according to the princess's hints of his character, must have been almost as exceptional a Jew as Mordecai. But were not men of ardent zeal and far-reaching hope everywhere exceptional? The men who had the visions which, as Mordecai said, were the creators and feeders of the world, molding and feeding the more passive life which without them would dwindle and shrivel into the narrow tenacity of insects, unshaken by thoughts beyond the reach of their antennae. Something of a mournful impatience perhaps added itself to the solicitude about Gwendolen, a solicitude that had room to grow in his present release from immediate cares, as an incitement to hasten from the synagogue and choose to take his evening walk toward the quay, always a favorite haunt with him, and just now attractive with the possibility that he might be in time to see the Grandcourts come in from their boating. In this case he resolved that he would advance to greet them deliberately, and ignore any grounds that the husband might have for wishing him elsewhere. The sun had set behind a bank of cloud, and only a faint yellow light was giving its farewell kisses to the waves, which were agitated by an active breeze. Deronda, sauntering slowly within sight of what took place on the strand, observed the groups there concentrating their attention on a sailing boat, which was advancing swiftly landward, being rowed by two men. Amidst the clamorous talk in various languages, Deronda held it the surer means of getting information not to ask questions, but to elbow his way to the foreground and be an unobstructed witness of what was occurring. Telescopes were being used, and loud statements made that the boat held somebody who had been drowned. One said it was the milord who had gone out in a sailing boat. Another maintained that the prostrate figure he discerned was milady. A Frenchman who had no glass would rather say that it was milord, who had probably taken his wife out to drown her, according to the national practice, a remark which an English skipper immediately commented on in our native idiom, as nonsense which had undergone a mining operation, and further dismissed by the decision that the reclining figure was a woman. For Deronda, terribly excited by fluctuating fears, the strokes of the oars as he watched them were divided by swift visions of events, possible and impossible, which might have brought about this issue, or this broken-off fragment of an issue, with a worse half undisclosed, if this woman apparently snatched from the waters were really Mrs. Grandcourt. But soon there was no longer any doubt. The boat was being pulled to land, and he saw Gwendolen half raising herself on her hands, by her own effort, under her heavy covering of tarpaulin and pea-jackets, pale as one of the sheeted dead, shivering, with wet hair streaming, a wild amazed consciousness in her eyes, as if she had waked up in a world where some judgment was impending, and the beings she saw around were coming to seize her. The first rower who jumped to land was also wet through, and ran off. The sailors close about the boat hindered Deronda from advancing, and he could only look on while Gwendolen gave scared glances and seemed to shrink with terror as she was carefully, tenderly helped out, and led on by the strong arms of those rough bronzed men, her wet clothes clinging about her limbs and adding to the impediment of her weakness. Suddenly her wandering eyes fell on Deronda standing before her, and immediately, as if she had been expecting him and looking for him, she tried to stretch out her arms, which were held back by her supporters, saying in a muffled voice, "It is come! It is come! He is dead!" "Hush, hush!" said Deronda in a tone of authority. "Quiet yourself." Then to the men who were assisting her, "I am a connection of this lady's husband. If you will get her on to the Italia as quickly as possible, I will undertake everything else." He stayed behind to hear from the remaining boatmen that her husband had gone down irrecoverably, and that his boat was left floating empty. He and his comrade had heard a cry, had come up just in time to see the lady jump in after her husband, and had got her out fast enough to save her from much damage. After this, Deronda hastened to the hotel to assure himself that the best medical help would be provided, and being satisfied on this point, he telegraphed the event to Sir Hugo, begging him to come forthwith, and also to Mr. Gascoigne, whose address at the rectory made his nearest known way of getting the information to Gwendolen's mother. Certain words of Gwendolen's in the past had come back to him, with the effectiveness of an inspiration. In moments of agitated confession she had spoken of her mother's presence as a possible help, if she could have had it. End of chapter 55. This recording is in the public domain. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Daniel Deronda by George Eliot. Chapter 56. The pang, the curse with which they died had never passed away. I could not draw my eyes from theirs, nor lift them up to pray. Coleridge. Deronda did not take off his clothes that night. Gwendolen, after insisting on seeing him again before she would consent to be undressed, had been perfectly quiet, and had only asked him, with a whispering repressed eagerness, to promise that he would come to her when she sent for him in the morning. Still, the possibility that a change might come over her, the danger of a supervening feverish condition, and the suspicion that something in the late catastrophe was having an effect which might betray itself in excited words, acted as a foreboding within him. He mentioned to her attendant that he should keep himself ready to be called if there were any alarming change of symptoms, making it understood by all concerned that he was in communication with her friends in England, and felt bound meanwhile to take all care on her behalf, a position which it was the easier for him to assume, because he was well known to Grandcourt's valet, the only old servant who had come on the late voyage. But when fatigue from the strangely various emotion of the day at last sent Deronda to sleep, he remained undisturbed except by the morning dreams, which came as a tangled web of yesterday's events, and finally waked him, with an image drawn by his pressing anxiety. Still it was morning, and there had been no summons, an augury which cheered him while he made his toilette, and reflected that it was too early to send inquiries. Later he learned that she had passed a too wakeful night, but had shown no violent signs of agitation, and was at last sleeping. He wondered at the force that dwelt in this creature, so alive to dread, for he had an irresistible impression that even under the effects of a severe physical shock she was mastering herself with a determination of concealment. For his own part, he thought that his sensibilities had been blunted by what he had been going through in the meeting with his mother. He seemed to himself now to be only fulfilling claims, and his more passionate sympathy was in abeyance. He had lately been living so keenly in an experience quite apart from Gwendolen's lot, that his present cares for her were like a revisiting of scenes familiar in the past, and there was not yet a complete revival of the inward response to them. Meanwhile he employed himself in getting a formal, legally recognized statement from the fisherman who had rescued Gwendolen. Few details came to light. The boat in which Grandcourt had gone out had been found drifting with its sail loose, and had been towed in. The fisherman thought it likely that he had been knocked overboard by the flapping of the sail while putting about, and that he had not known how to swim. But though they were near, their attention had been first arrested by a cry which seemed like that of a man in distress, and while they were hastening with their oars, they heard a shriek from the lady and saw her jump in. On re-entering the hotel, Deronda was told that Gwendolen had risen and was desiring to see him. He was shown into a room darkened by blinds and curtains, where she was seated with a white shawl wrapped round her, looking toward the opening door like one waiting uneasily. But her long hair was gathered up and coiled carefully, and through all the blue stars in her ears had kept their place. As she started impulsively to her full height, sheathed in her white shawl, her face and neck not less white except for a purple line under her eyes, her lips a little apart, with the peculiar expression of one accused and helpless, she looked like the unhappy ghost of that Gwendolen Harleth, whom Deronda had seen turning with firm lips and proud self-possession from her losses at the gaming table. The sight pierced him with pity, and the effects of all their past relations began to revive within him. "I beseech you to rest, not to stand," said Deronda as he approached her, and she obeyed, falling back into her chair again. "Will you sit down near me?" she said. "I want to speak very low." She was in a large arm-chair, and he drew a small one near to her side. The action seemed to touch her peculiarly. Turning her pale face full upon his, which was very near, she said in the lowest audible tone, "You know I am a guilty woman?" Deronda himself turned paler as he said, "I know nothing." He did not dare to say more. "He is dead." She uttered this with the same undertoned decision. "Yes," said Deronda, in a mournful suspense which made him reluctant to speak. "His face will not be seen above the water again," said Gwendolen, in a tone that was not louder, but of a suppressed eagerness, while she held both her hands clenched. "No." "Not by any one else, only by me. A dead face. I shall never get away from it." It was with an inward voice of desperate self‐repression that she spoke these last words, while she looked away from Deronda toward something at a distance from her on the floor. She was seeing the whole event, her own acts included, through an exaggerating medium of excitement and horror. Was she in a state of delirium into which there entered a sense of concealment and necessity for self‐repression? Such thoughts glanced through Deronda as a sort of hope. But imagine the conflict of feeling that kept him silent. She was bent on confession, and he dreaded hearing her confession. Against his better will he shrank from the task that was laid on him. He wished, and yet rebuked the wish as cowardly, that she could bury her secrets in her own bosom. He was not a priest. He dreaded the weight of this woman's soul flung upon his own with imploring dependence. But she spoke again, hurriedly, looking at him. "You will not say that I ought to tell the world? You will not say that I ought to be disgraced? I could not do it. I could not bear it. I could not have my mother know—not if I were dead. No, I could not have her know. I must tell you. But you will not say that any one else should know." "I can say nothing in my ignorance," said Deronda mournfully, "except that I desire to help you." "I told you from the beginning, as soon as I could, I told you I was afraid of myself." There was a piteous pleading in the low murmur in which Deronda turned his ear only. Her face afflicted him too much. "I felt a hatred in me that was always working like an evil spirit, contriving things. Everything I could do to free myself came into my mind, and it got worse. All things got worse. That is why I asked you to come to me in town. I thought then I would tell you the worst about myself. I tried, but I could not tell everything. And he came in." She paused, while a shudder passed through her, but soon went on. "I will tell you everything now. Do you think a woman who cried and prayed and struggled to be saved from herself could be a murderess?" "Great God!" said Deronda, in a deep, shaken voice. "Don't torture me needlessly. You have not murdered him. You threw yourself into the water with the impulse to save him. Tell me the rest afterward. This death was an accident that you could not have hindered." "Don't be impatient with me." The tremor, the childlike beseeching in these words, compelled Deronda to turn his head and look at her face. The poor quivering lips went on. "You said—you used to say—you felt more for those who had done something wicked and were miserable. You said they might get better. They might be scourged into something better. If you had not spoken in that way, everything would have been worse. I did remember all you said to me. It came to me always. It came to me at the very last. That was the reason why I— But now, if you cannot bear with me when I tell you everything, if you turn away from me and forsake me, what shall I do? Am I worse than I was when you found me and wanted to make me better? All the wrong I have done was in me then, and more, and more. And if you had not come and been patient with me, and now, will you forsake me?" Her hands, which had been so tightly clenched some minutes before, were now helplessly relaxed and trembling on the arm of her chair. Her quivering lips remained parted as she ceased speaking. Deronda could not answer. He was obliged to look away. He took one of her hands and clasped it as if they were going to walk together like two children. It was the only way in which he could answer, "I will not forsake you." And all the while he felt as if he were putting his name to a blank paper which might be filled up terribly. Their attitude, his averted face, with its expression of a suffering which he was solemnly resolved to undergo, might have told half the truth of the situation to a beholder who had suddenly entered. That grasp was an entirely new experience to Gwendolen. She had never before had from any man a sign of tenderness which her own being had needed, and she interpreted its powerful effect on her into a promise of inexhaustible patience and constancy. The stream of renewed strength made it possible for her to go on as she had begun, with that fitful wandering confession
where the sameness of experience seems to nullify the sense of time or of order in events. She began again in a fragmentary way. "All sorts of contrivances in my mind, but all so difficult, and I fought against them. I was terrified at them. I saw his dead face." Here her voice sank almost to a whisper close to Deronda's ear. "Ever so long ago I saw it, and I wished him to be dead, and yet it terrified me. I was like two creatures. I could not speak. I wanted to kill. It was as strong as thirst. And then directly, I felt beforehand I had done something dreadful, unalterable, that would make me like an evil spirit. And it came. It came." She was silent a moment or two, as if her memory had lost itself in a web where each mesh drew all the rest. "It had all been in my mind when I first spoke to you, when we were at the Abbey. I had done something then. I could not tell you what. It was the only thing I did toward carrying out my thoughts. They went about over everything. But they all remained like dreadful dreams, all but one. I did one act, and I never undid it. It is still there, as long ago as when we were at Ryelands. There it was, something my fingers longed for among the beautiful toys in the cabinet in my boudoir, small and sharp like a long willow leaf in a silver sheath. I locked it in the drawer of my dressing-case. I was continually haunted with it and how I should use it. I fancied myself putting it under my pillow, but I never did. I never looked at it again. I dared not unlock the drawer. It had a key all to itself, and not long ago when we were in the yacht I dropped the key into the deep water. It was my wish to drop it and deliver myself. After that I began to think how I could open the drawer without the key, and when I found we were to stay at Genoa, it came into my mind that I could get it opened privately at the hotel. But then, when we were going up the stairs, I met you, and I thought I should talk to you alone and tell you this—everything I could not tell you in town. And then I was forced to go out in the boat." A sob had for the first time risen with the last words, and she sank back in her chair. The memory of that acute disappointment seemed for the moment to efface what had come since. Deronda did not look at her, but he said insistently, "And it has all remained in your imagination. It has gone on only in your thought. To the last the evil temptation has been resisted?" There was silence. The tears had rolled down her cheeks. She pressed her handkerchief against them and sat upright. She was summoning her resolution, and again, leaning a little toward Deronda's ear, she began in a whisper, "No, no, I will tell you everything as God knows it. I will tell you no falsehood. I will tell you the exact truth. What should I do else? I used to think I could never be wicked. I thought of wicked people as if they were a long way off me. Since then I have been wicked. I have felt wicked, and everything has been a punishment to me. All the things I used to wish for, it is as if they had been made red-hot. The very daylight has often been a punishment to me, because, you know, I ought not to have married. That was the beginning of it. I wronged someone else. I broke my promise. I meant to get pleasure for myself, and it all turned to misery. I wanted to make my gain out of another's loss. You remember? It was like roulette, and the money burned into me. And I could not complain. It was as if I had prayed that another should lose and I should win. And I had won. I knew it all. I knew I was guilty. When we were on the sea, and I lay awake at night in the cabin, I sometimes felt that everything I had done lay open without excuse. Nothing was hidden. How could anything be known to me only? It was not my own knowledge. It was God's that had entered into me, and even the stillness. Everything held a punishment for me. Everything but you. I always thought that you would not want me to be punished. You would have tried and helped me to be better. And only thinking of that helped me. You will not change. You will not want to punish me now?" Again a sob had risen. "God forbid!" groaned Deronda. But he sat motionless. This long wandering with the conscience-stricken one over her past was difficult to bear, but he dared not again urge her with a question. He must let her mind follow its own need. She unconsciously left intervals in her retrospect, not clearly distinguishing between what she said and what she had only an inward vision of. Her next words came after such an interval. "That all made it so hard when I was forced to go in the boat, because when I saw you it was an unexpected joy, and I thought I could tell you everything about the locked-up drawer and what I had not told you before, and if I had told you and knew it was in your mind, it would have less power over me. I hoped and trusted in that. For after all my struggles and my crying, the hatred and rage, the temptation that frightened me, the longing, the thirst for what I dreaded, always came back. And that disappointment, when I was quite shut out from speaking to you, and was driven to go in the boat, brought all the evil back, as if I had been locked in a prison with it and no escape. Oh, it seems so long ago now since I stepped into that boat. I could have given up everything in that moment, to have the forked lightning for a weapon to strike him dead." Some of the compressed fierceness that she was recalling seemed to find its way into her undertoned utterance. After a little silence, she said, with agitated hurry, "If he were here again, what should I do? I cannot wish him here, and yet I cannot bear his dead face. I was a coward. I ought to have borne contempt. I ought to have gone away, gone and wandered like a beggar rather than to stay and feel like a fiend. But turn where I would, there was something I could not bear. Sometimes I thought he would kill me if I resisted his will. But now his dead face is there, and I cannot bear it." Suddenly loosing Deronda's hand, she started up, stretching her arms to their full length upward, and said with a sort of moan, "I have been a cruel woman. What can I do but cry for help? I am sinking. Die, die, you are forsaken. Go down into darkness. Forsaken, no pity. I shall be forsaken." She sank in her chair again and broke into sobs. Even Deronda had no place in her consciousness at that moment. He was completely unmanned. Instead of finding, as he had imagined, that his late experience had dulled his susceptibility to fresh emotion, it seemed that the lot of this young creature, whose swift travel from her bright rash girlhood into this agony of remorse he had had to behold in helplessness, pierced him the deeper because it came close upon another sad revelation of spiritual conflict. He was in one of those moments when the very anguish of passionate pity makes us ready to choose that we will know pleasure no more, and live only for the stricken and afflicted. He had risen from his seat while he watched that terrible outburst, which seemed the more awful to him because, even in this supreme agitation, she kept the suppressed voice of one who confesses in secret. At last he felt impelled to turn his back toward her and walk to a distance. But presently there was stillness. Her mind had opened to the sense that he had gone away from her. When Deronda turned round to approach her again, he saw her face bent toward him, her eyes dilated, her lips parted. She was an image of timid, forlorn beseeching, too timid to entreat in words, while he kept himself aloof from her. Was she forsaken by him, now, already? But his eyes met hers sorrowfully, met hers for the first time fully since she had said, "You know I am a guilty woman." And that full glance in its intense mournfulness seemed to say, "I know it, but I shall all the less forsake you." He sat down by her side again in the same attitude, without turning his face toward her, and without again taking her hand. Once more Gwendolen was pierced, as she had been by his face of sorrow at the Abbey, with a compunction less egoistic than that which urged her to confess, and she said in a tone of loving regret, "I make you very unhappy." Deronda gave an indistinct "Oh," just shrinking together and changing his attitude a little. Then he had gathered resolution enough to say clearly, "There is no question of being happy or unhappy. What I most desire at this moment is what will most help you. Tell me all you feel it a relief to tell." Devoted as these words were, they widened his spiritual distance from her, and she felt it more difficult to speak. She had a vague need of getting nearer to that compassion which seemed to be regarding her from a halo of superiority, and the need turned into an impulse to humble herself more. She was ready to throw herself on her knees before him. But no, her wonderfully mixed consciousness held checks on that impulse, and she was kept silent and motionless by the pressure of opposing needs. Her stillness made Deronda at last say, "Perhaps you are too weary. Shall I go away and come again whenever you wish it?" "No, no," said Gwendolen, the dread of his leaving her bringing back her power of speech. She went on with her low-toned eagerness. "I want to tell you what it was that came over me in that boat. I was full of rage at being obliged to go—full of rage, and I could do nothing but sit there like a galley slave. And then we got away, out of the port, into the deep, and everything was still, and we never looked at each other, only he spoke to order me, and the very light about me seemed to hold me a prisoner and force me to sit as I did. It came over me that when I was a child I used to fancy sailing away into a world where people were not forced to live with any one they did not like. I did not like my father-in-law to come home. And now, I thought, just the opposite had come to me. I had stepped into a boat, and my life was a sailing and sailing away, gliding on and no help, always into solitude with him, away from deliverance. And because I felt more helpless than ever, my thoughts went out over worse things. I longed for worse things. I had cruel wishes. I fancied impossible ways of— I did not want to die myself. I was afraid of our being drowned together. If it had been any use, I should have prayed. I should have prayed that something might befall him. I should have prayed that he might sink out of my sight and leave me alone. I knew no way of killing hint there, but I did. I did kill him in my thoughts." She sank into silence for a minute, submerged by the weight of memory which no words could represent. "But yet, all the while I felt that I was getting more wicked, and what had been with me so much came to me just then, what you once said about dreading to increase my wrong-doing and my remorse. I should hope for nothing then. It was all like a writing of fire within me. Getting wicked was misery, being shut out forever from knowing what better lives were. That had always been coming back to me then, but yet with a despair, a feeling that it was no use. Evil wishes were too strong. I remember then letting go the tiller and saying, 'God help me.' But then I was forced to take it again and go on, and the evil longings, the evil prayers came again and blotted everything else dim, till in the midst of them, I don't know how it was, he was turning the sail. There was a gust. He was struck. I know nothing. I only know that I saw my wish outside me." She began to speak more hurriedly and in more of a whisper. "I saw him sink, and my heart gave a leap as if it were going out of me. I think I did not move. I kept my hands tight. It was long enough for me to be glad, and yet to think it was no use. He would come up again. And he was come, farther off. The boat had moved. It was all like lightning. 'The rope!' he called out in a voice not his own. I hear it now, and I stooped for the rope. I felt I must. I felt sure he could swim, and he would come back whether or not, and I dreaded him. That was in my mind. He would come back. But he was gone down again, and I had the rope in my hand. No, there he was again, his face above the water, and he cried again, and I held my hand, and my heart said, 'Die!' and he sank, and I felt, 'It is done. I am wicked, and I am lost.' I had the rope in my hand. I don't know what I thought. I was leaping away from myself. I would have saved him then. I was leaping from my crime, and there it was, close to me as I fell. There was the dead face. Dead! Dead! It can never be altered. That was what happened. That was what I did. You know it all. It can never be altered." She shrank back in her chair, exhausted with the agitation of memory and speech. Deronda felt the burden on his spirit less heavy than the foregoing dread. The word guilty had held a possibility of interpretations worse than the fact. And Gwendolen's confession, for the very reason that her conscience made her dwell on the determining power of her evil thoughts, convinced him the more that there had been throughout a counterbalancing struggle of her better will. It seemed almost certain that her murderous thought had had no outward effect, that quite apart from it, the death was inevitable. Still a question as to the outward effectiveness of a criminal desire dominant enough to impel even a momentary act cannot alter our judgment of the desire, and Deronda shrank from putting that question forward in the first instance. He held it likely that Gwendolen's remorse aggravated her inward guilt, and that she gave the character of decisive action to what had been an inappreciably instantaneous glance of desire. But her remorse was the precious sign of a recoverable nature. It was the culmination of that self-disapproval which had been the awakening of a new life within her. It marked her off from the criminals whose only regret is failure in securing their evil wish. Deronda could not utter one word to diminish that sacred aversion to her worse self, that thorn-pressure which must come with the crowning of the sorrowful better, suffering because of the worse. All this mingled thought and feeling kept him silent. Speech was too momentous to be ventured on rashly. There were no words of comfort that did not carry some sacrilege. If he had opened his lips to speak, he could only have echoed, "It can never be altered. It remains unaltered to alter other things." But he was silent and motionless. He did not know how long, before he turned to look at her, and saw her sunk back with closed eyes like a lost, weary, storm-beaten white doe, unable to rise and pursue its unguided way. He rose and stood before her. The movement touched her consciousness, and she opened her eyes with a slight quivering that seemed like fear. "You must rest now. Try to rest. Try to sleep. And may I see you again this evening, tomorrow, when you have had some rest? Let us say no more now." The tears came, and she could not answer except by a slight movement of the head. Deronda rang for attendance, spoke urgently of the necessity that she should be got to rest, and then left her. End of chapter 56.
This recording is in the public domain.